on the surface, colonial laws read like parody. They were very controlling and very odd. I mean, no lace if you weren't important enough, watch your mouth or pay a fine. Love only with witnesses, pray on schedule, drink, but don't drink too much, dress modestly, think carefully, behave publicly. This is absurd. But beneath the weirdness sits a very consistent anxiety. If you take class, these lawmakers were very desperate to preserve visible hierarchies in a world where social mobility was suddenly very, very possible. Basically, prior to this point, where you were born, who you were born to, and the place that you were born in was where you were going to stay for your entire life. And so this kind of blew the lid off of it. We have room for enterprise and expansion and creativity and social climbing for the first time ever. And of course, that makes certain people very, very, very uncomfortable. Clothing, consumption, and status markers obviously had to be controlled so that power stayed very legible and easy to interpret without using too much brain power. If you had to actually talk to someone and get to know them before you knew where they stood in the world, I mean, my God, who has the time for that? I say very tongue in cheek. I'm obviously kidding. Now, if we take morality for just a second, behavior was not just personal. Of course, it was so communal. It affected everybody. One person's sin, whether we perceive it as a sin now or not, back then they did. And that one person's sin was believed to invite disaster for everyone, which is somewhat biblical, which is the book they were getting all this stuff from. So it's almost like, how can you blame these people for not thinking that? I mean, honestly, how could you blame these people for not thinking that if one person in the community is committing a quote unquote sin, that it's going to affect everybody in ways like it affected people in the Bible? So I don't want to come down too harshly on the thought processes behind this, even though they do seem outrageous to me now. But I just have to tell you that law became a tool to just enforce virtue. And it didn't matter if they used fear or shame or, people talking about you in the community. They had to have these laws kept, even if your heart wasn't in it, because they basically were scared. They were just very, very scared. And then, of course, control plays a huge factor because small communities could not afford chaos. And again, I understand the fire laws. I really do. The gossip laws were maybe just a little bit stepping on people's toes, but scandal or defiance, it was going to spread fast because regulation stepped in where trust felt very, very fragile. And everything in this new world was fragile. I mean, even getting here was such a journey and it was fragile. And then life was fragile. And then the laws are, I mean, everything's so delicate at this time in history. And the powers that be, were really just trying to do their best to keep a lid on everything because they were so scared that it was going to unravel. And thank God it didn't. But it seems insane. I just don't want to come off like I'm being judgy or being hateful because I shouldn't say everybody, most people are doing their best with what they're given. I shouldn't say nobody. Most people are really not that evil in their hearts. They're just misguided. They weren't trying to be oppressive. They were trying to protect themselves and the person to the left and right of them. These laws were not written by cartoon villains. They were written by people who were trying, sometimes very clumsily, to hold a society together. I can really understand that. We're all just out here doing our best. It's not easy every day. Some days things are funny. Some days they're really, really shocking. I know that it is tempting to laugh and say, thank the good Lord, or whatever deity you believe in, that we do not live like that anymore. And we don't. But the anxieties and the anxiety in the air must feel very, very familiar, not just to me, but it has to feel a bit familiar to you too, because we're still arguing over who belongs where. We still police behavior, speech, appearance in more social ways rather than legal ways, but we're still doing it. And we still struggle to find the balance between freedom and order. That's something that's always going to be on the docket because if you give people complete and total free reign, it ends up with like a really violent version of Sodom and Gomorrah. You can't just let people do whatever they want, but at the same time, you can't control people either. And I really do think that we have certain people in our country at this time. We do have people that are in places of power who I think, at least at one point or another, had their priorities of protecting us from this kind of control that has been high on their list. And for that, I'm grateful. I do not choose to believe that every single person is evil. I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that every person in power is awful and trying to control us. I will never believe that. I don't believe that back then. I don't believe that now. I don't think that people are as bad as we perceive them to be. I just think that it's hard to know what's in someone's head. I will never know the motif of another person because I'm not that person. And I refuse to live in a world, even if I'm actively putting my head in the sand, I refuse to live in a world where I deem every person evil, awful, bad, controlling, power hungry, etc., etc. Not everybody is a sociopath, okay?